Along a desolate stretch of coastal highway, the wind often whispers a chilling question. How did this remote expanse conceal dark secrets for an entire decade? The stretch of highway was silent, frequently shrouded in the dense Atlantic fog, providing a grim cover.
It was a silence that allowed someone to hunt the vulnerable with terrifying impunity, and it forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about whether institutional blindness inadvertently shielded a monster operating for too long in plain sight.
Tonight, we walk the wet pavement of Ocean Parkway to begin unraveling the deeply unsettling Long Island serial killer case.
A mystery that remained tragically unsolved for so long.
We begin not at the start of the crimes, but where that suffocating silence was finally broken. But then, the discovery changed everything. The investigators found.
We often begin true crime stories with a discovery, a body found. But sometimes the narrative begins much more subtly, with just a voice in the dark.
That's precisely how the disappearance of Shannon Gilbert began. A chilling, frantic plea for help that launched one of the most perplexing cases in recent memory.
It was May 1st, 2010. Shannon Gilbert, a 24-year-old, was working as a sex worker and had been at a client's home within the isolated gated community of Oak Beach.
The investigators found Oak Beach to be a very particular kind of place. It's quiet, private, and remote. A double-edged sword when a crime occurs, as it can both conceal and isolate.
Something went terribly wrong that night. Shannon fled the home in a panic, desperately calling 911. Her frantic call lasted 23 minutes.
She screamed. Over and over again, the dispatchers heard her yell, "They are trying to kill me." The sheer terror in her voice for that duration, it paints a harrowing picture of her final moments of known contact.
Yet, when police finally arrived, the stretch of highway was silent. The night had already swallowed her whole. There were only footprints, fading into the marshland.
They searched, of course, but the environment there is vast and unforgiving. The immediate aftermath offered no trace of her, only the unsettling silence where a woman had just cried out for her life.
For months, the vast, unforgiving marshlands along Long Island's coast had kept their impenetrable silence, a desolate, wind-swept expanse where secrets could easily remain buried.
Investigators had been tirelessly searching that challenging terrain, their primary focus on finding Shannon Gilbert, a young woman who had vanished without a trace in the spring of that year.
But then, in December of 2010, during what was meant to be a routine canine training exercise, the grim discovery changed everything.
Officer John Malia's canine unit, a specialized dog trained for human remains detection, gave a distinct and unmistakable signal. The location was a particularly dense thicket, overgrown with poison ivy and sharp brambles.
They had been searching for Shannon Gilbert. What the officers unearthed instead, however, was a set of human skeletal remains, disturbingly wrapped in burlap.
It was immediately apparent these were not the remains of Shannon Gilbert. This find was different. It suggested a far more organized and sinister act.
This single horrifying discovery became the first thread pulled in a chilling tapestry of horror that would soon begin to unravel across the quiet shores of Long Island. The stretch of highway, desolate and often cloaked in coastal fog, was usually silent, save for the distant ocean. For a long time, its quiet concealed a terrible secret.
What began as a search for a single missing person quickly broadened. The investigators found a cluster of remains, not just one, but multiple.
Within days, 3 more bodies were uncovered, all shockingly close, within a 500-foot radius. But then, this rapid and clustered discovery changed everything.
It transformed the perception of the case entirely. It was no longer an isolated incident, but the undeniable signature of a predator. The proximity, the method, it screamed intent.
These 4 women, Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Melissa Barthélemy, Megan Waterman, and Amber Lynn Costello, would be tragically linked, forever known as the Gilgo Four.
The commonalities were undeniable. All were petite women, all had advertised their services on online platforms, and their disposal, it spoke volumes.
Each victim was discarded with a chilling, methodical precision.
This wasn't merely a dumping. The killer meticulously hid them, creating a clandestine graveyard, all just yards from the constant flow of commuter traffic, a grim secret hidden in plain sight.
For a time, the disappearances remained isolated incidents, each a separate mystery. But then, the discovery changed everything.
The investigators found a deeply unsettling pattern emerging from the evidence. Forensic analysis on the victims revealed a distinct, disturbing modus operandi.
Beyond the violence itself, the method of disposal was stark.
Each victim had been strangled and then wrapped meticulously in burlap sacking. Not just any material, but what appeared to be camouflage hunting blind fabric.
The stretch of highway was silent, the deep undergrowth a desolate hiding place. This particular detail, the burlap, what did it tell them?
It suggested a perpetrator who was not only organized and patient, but also intimately familiar with the outdoors. This wasn't a random act. There was a deliberate, almost ritualistic aspect to it.
Stripped of identification, of dignity, vibrant lives reduced to anonymous bundles in the undergrowth.
Exactly. The intention wasn't just to kill, but to dehumanize, to erase. This level of meticulous depersonalization, the control over the victim's final state, it pointed towards the dark signature of a sexual sadist.
The shadow of cruelty in these cases wasn't cast solely by the murders themselves.
No, the malice extended far beyond the immediate violence, into a realm of prolonged psychological torment.
In the tragic instance of Melissa Barthelemy, the killer took an almost unimaginable step. He used her own mobile phone.
And what he did with it? It was a deliberate act designed to inflict maximum pain. He called her younger sister.
For weeks, that family endured a horrifying ordeal.
The calls weren't just taunts. He used them to deliver graphic, vulgar descriptions of what he had done, a sustained campaign of terror.
These disturbing communications left an electronic trail, pinging off cell towers from the vibrant heart of Midtown Manhattan to the quieter communities of Massapequa Park.
But then, the full, horrifying scope of his intention became clear. This wasn't merely about the crime. It was a brazen, calculated display of control. It proved he was watching, terrorizing, and believed himself utterly untouchable.
As the calendar turned to the spring of 2011, the intense search for Shannon Gilbert continued along that desolate stretch of highway.
What the investigators found that spring, however, would transcend the initial missing persons case entirely. The scope of the nightmare, it began to expand beyond anything they could have imagined.
Further along the parkway, in the quiet, overgrown areas, a series of harrowing discoveries were made. 6 more sets of human remains, unearthed in quick succession.
This wasn't just another victim. With each new discovery, the very profile of the victims they were dealing with, it shifted profoundly. The assumptions vanished.
Among these new findings was a disturbing array. The tiny bones of a toddler, an Asian male dressed in women's clothing.
But then, the discovery changed everything. Partial remains that forensic teams could connect to other unsolved cases. Torsos found years earlier 40 miles away in Manorville. Suddenly, the isolated disappearances were linked to a much darker, wider tapestry.
The stretch of highway was silent, yet spoke volumes of horror. It was here the investigators found a chilling, undeniable link. Dismembered remains now connected the infamous Gilgo dumping ground directly to the desolate Manorville Pine Barrens.
This wasn't merely a grim discovery. The victims, Jessica Taylor and Valerie Mack, had been butchered with a deliberate, brutal precision. Their parts were scattered widely, clearly an attempt to impede any hope of identification.
A stark escalation in the violence.
Precisely. For the task force, this development immediately brought forth agonizing questions. Did it signal an evolution in the killer's already horrific methods, a more calculated, perhaps even more deranged approach? Or was the unthinkable true, the presence of a second, equally monstrous individual?
But then, the sheer proximity of these horrific sights began to paint a different, even more disturbing picture. The discovery changed everything.
Indeed, the geographical thread pulling these brutal acts together across Long Island pointed overwhelmingly to a single, consistent hand. One predator, methodically treating the entire South Shore as his deeply personal, deeply desecrated disposal site.
The investigators found a landscape littered with sorrow. Among the many grim discoveries, some resonated with a particularly chilling resonance. There was a woman, known to the team only as Peaches. A distinctive tattoo, her sole initial identifier, gave her that heartbreaking moniker. The stretch of highway was silent, yet it held terrible secrets. Miles away from where Peaches was found, forensic teams discovered her toddler daughter. Two separate findings, yet intimately bound by a single unspeakable act. To encounter such a scene, the murder of a mother and her child, it speaks to a profound and absolute absence of humanity. This isn't a crime of opportunity or passion. The level of callousness required suggests a predator, a psychopath utterly devoid of empathy. For a time, these were separate, devastating pieces of a larger puzzle. But then, the discovery changed everything. Modern forensic science, particularly DNA analysis, would later confirm the unimaginable connection between the mother and her child.
It painted a terrifying picture. This wasn't merely a killer targeting individuals. It became clear he was systematically erasing entire family units. This tactic, this utter depravity, suggests a desperate attempt to sever all potential links, to eliminate any witness or trace that could lead back to him. It was about protecting his own identity at any cost.
Yet, despite the horrifying clarity DNA provided about the crime, the true identity of Peaches, the woman behind the nickname, remains one of the case's most enduring and haunting voids.
The stretch of highway was silent, the winter air still, until December of 2011. But then, the discovery changed everything. Shannon Gilbert's remains were finally found, deep within the marsh, a considerable distance from the roadside.
The investigators found themselves facing a profound and immediate question. Officially, the police theory labeled her death as a misadventure, suggesting a drug-induced drowning.
Yet, her family harbored a deep skepticism, unable to reconcile that narrative with the grim circumstances of her disappearance and discovery.
Independent pathologists soon joined their dissent. Their examinations revealed potential damage to the hyoid bone, an injury often observed in cases consistent with strangulation.
Shannon Gilbert was the very catalyst that sparked this entire sprawling investigation. Despite that undeniable fact, she remains a haunting outlier in the official narrative of the Long Island serial killer. Following the initial haunting discoveries, the investigation settled into a chilling silence. Years began to accumulate, marked only by the painful absence of arrests.
It wasn't merely a lack of viable leads. The very foundation of the inquiry was profoundly troubled. We now know the Suffolk County Police Department's investigation was deeply plagued by internal politics and a disturbing current of corruption.
At the heart of this obstruction was Chief of Police James Burke, a man whose own later crimes would send him to prison, but whose influence here proved far more insidious.
Burke's directive was explicit. He actively blocked any involvement from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. This wasn't oversight, it was a deliberate and calculated obstruction, a critical lifeline severed.
The consequence was devastating. This refusal of external aid, this conscious blocking, almost certainly cost the investigation crucial, irretrievable years. The window for swift justice narrowed,
allowing the killer, whoever they were, to vanish further into the shadows. The trail, once perhaps navigable, was permitted to freeze over entirely, while the person responsible for such horrors remained at liberty.
As years turned into a decade, the case grew cold, its momentum fading. In an attempt to revitalize the stalled investigation, authorities turned to the public once more.
They released a single striking image. It was of a simple leather belt, embossed with a set of initials, HM or WH.
The investigators found this belt at one of the grim crime scenes, a silent testament left behind. For years, it would be the only tangible clue ever presented to the public.
It was a deeply personal artifact, a piece of a life. Was it a trophy taken by the perpetrator, a dark memento, or perhaps a critical mistake, accidentally discarded?
It offered a faint, unsettling hint at a name.
A name that, despite this discovery, would remain shrouded in mystery for another long decade. For years, the silence of the unsolved case lingered, a grim echo along the quiet backroads. The initial stretches of highway where the victims were found offered little in the way of immediate answers. The investigators searched, but the early efforts, though well-intentioned, often became isolated.
There was a vast amount of information, yes, a genuine mountain of tips. But without a truly unified approach, critical pieces could easily be overshadowed, almost lost in the noise.
It wasn't until 2022 that a fundamental shift occurred. Under new leadership, a multi-agency task force was finally formed.
This was different. The FBI, state, and local police made a deliberate commitment to share everything, to work without the departmental friction that can often impede complex investigations. It was about setting egos aside.
With this renewed focus, they began to revisit the old evidence, not just rereading it, but examining it with the sharpened perspective of modern investigative tools and fresh eyes.
The primary objective was to unearth what had been missed, and almost immediately the investigators found themselves drawn to two specific, often overlooked areas. Their focus narrowed.
They meticulously re-examined mobile phone data from the very earliest days of the original investigation, information that at the time was overwhelming in its sheer volume and complexity.
And alongside that, those initial vehicle descriptions, once seemingly lost within a deluge of less credible leads, suddenly stood out. The data, once scattered, began to coalesce, whispering forgotten truths.
But then, the discovery within those forgotten details, the potential unlocked by a new approach, changed everything. The long silence of the past began to yield its secrets. A memory, perhaps elusive, yet crystal clear on one singular detail, a first-generation Chevrolet Avalanche. This vehicle, mentioned by a crucial witness in the disappearance of Amber Costello, would prove pivotal.
In 2010, when Amber vanished, that model was common, just another truck on the roads, easily overlooked. But time, in these cases, can reshape perspective.
The stretch of highway, for so long, held its secrets in silence. But then, as the cold case intensified, that specific detail took on a new, chilling significance. By 2022, that exact truck was no longer common. It was a rarity.
The task force understood this shift. They embarked on an incredibly meticulous search, combing through registration databases, filtering for that dwindling population of vehicles. Every entry was examined.
And then, the discovery changed everything. The investigators found their match. A first-generation Chevrolet Avalanche, registered to an address in Massapequa Park.
It belonged to an architectural consultant, a man who, by all accounts, had lived his entire life in that same unassuming community.
His name was Rex Heuermann.
Rex Heuermann presented himself as an entirely mundane figure. An architect by trade, he commuted daily into Manhattan, a husband and father, living a seemingly unremarkable suburban life.
Indeed, he blended in, wore those ill-fitting suits. On the surface, there was absolutely nothing to suggest a hidden darkness. He was, to all appearances, just another man in the crowd.
But then, the discovery changed everything. What lay beneath the surface, meticulously recorded in his digital footprint, told a profoundly different story.
The investigators found an extensive, disturbing archive, thousands upon thousands of searches for torture pornography. They also uncovered relentless inquiries into the status of the ongoing investigation itself, and perhaps, most chillingly, an obsessive tracking of the victims' families, their online activities, and public presence.
For years, the case was cold, a frustrating silence in the face of unspeakable horror. The investigation had lingered, often feeling lost in the vastness of the digital world. But then, a new approach offered a faint glimmer of hope.
The focus shifted not to traditional forensics, but to the digital shadows, specifically the burner phones used to make those initial chilling contacts with the victims. The investigators found themselves sifting through what felt like an endless sea of anonymized data.
What emerged from that digital chaos was not random at all. It was a deeply unsettling, terrifying pattern.
When we meticulously mapped the location data from those disposable phones, the truth began to solidify. The movements weren't chaotic, they were deliberate. The devices traveled consistently, almost methodically, between two very distinct locations.
Midtown Manhattan and a quiet suburb on Long Island, Massapequa Park. A chilling parallel to a very specific daily routine, someone's daily commute, unknowingly traced by the anonymous devices used in his crimes.
Yes, it was a precise mirroring, the ordinariness of the daily journey, now seen through a terrifying new lens.
The ordinary routine revealed through the extraordinary analysis of data. But then the discovery changed everything.
That granular data allowed us to pinpoint those devices to a remarkably tight radius, not just general areas, but a very specific office building in the city and an equally specific home address in Massapequa Park.
For so long, the suspect had been an elusive shadow, a ghost in the system. But now, the ghost in the data finally had a physical address.
For many months, surveillance teams maintained a quiet vigilance around Rex Heuermann. Their presence, unseen. Their objective, absolute.
The key, they knew, lay in a single microscopic strand, a hair recovered from the crude burlap sacking that had concealed one of the victims. To secure their case, a definitive DNA match was essential.
The patient observation continued through the chill of early 2023. Then an opportunity arose, seemingly mundane, yet charged with immense significance. Outside his Manhattan office, Heuermann casually discarded a pizza crust.
It was a fleeting, unremarkable act, but for the teams it was pivotal. The investigators found their crucial evidence. From the trash, the discarded item was meticulously retrieved.
Back in the hushed quiet of the laboratory, the crust began to yield its hidden truths. Genetic material, a silent echo of the suspect's presence, was carefully isolated.
And the revelation was undeniable. The mitochondrial DNA profile, extracted from that seemingly insignificant piece of food, provided a high-confidence match. It was the same profile as the hair found with Megan Waterman, a devastating confirmation of their suspicions.
The painstaking surveillance, the long months of quiet waiting, it had all culminated in this moment.
Indeed, this was the irrefutable link. But then the discovery changed everything. It transformed a complex web of evidence into a clear path towards accountability.
As investigators delved deeper into the grim puzzle, the forensic evidence began to paint an even more unsettling picture.
Among the myriad of microscopic traces recovered from the victims' bodies, investigators found female hairs. What was immediately clear was that these hairs did not belong to the victims themselves, nor to Rex Heuermann.
It was a perplexing anomaly, a detail that initially seemed to defy explanation. But then the discovery changed everything.
Through painstaking DNA analysis, those hairs were conclusively linked to Heuermann's wife, an incredibly disturbing revelation given her established alibi. Travel records confirmed she was out of town, sometimes hundreds of miles away, during the window of every single murder.
A chilling realization began to dawn. The killer had, in the most profoundly invasive way imaginable, transferred a part of his everyday domestic life onto the women he strangled.
From his home, his car, his personal space, her innocent hair became a grotesque signature. It was the ultimate twisted intrusion, a stark blurring of the carefully constructed lines of his double life.
For 13 long years, the shadow of a relentless predator lingered over Long Island. But on July 13, 2023, the wait, for many, was finally over.
The task force made its decisive move. Rex Heuermann was taken into custody, quite publicly, outside his office in Midtown Manhattan.
And with that arrest, the focus shifted dramatically. The quiet suburban neighborhood of Massapequa Park was instantly transformed.
Indeed, his dilapidated house became the epicenter of an intensive investigation. Police swarmed the property, effectively turning the entire area into a secured zone, a fortress.
The man who had allegedly eluded capture for over a decade was finally in handcuffs.
He appeared bewildered, almost disoriented, and in that moment, the world, for the very first time, was able to put a face to the individual suspected of being the LISK.
The investigators found Heuermann's home to be a place of disquieting secrets.
A severe hoarding situation, yes, but more than that. It was a suffocating environment, every surface obscured by decades of accumulation.
And then the discovery of a locked vault. Inside, a staggering arsenal, over 200 firearms.
It painted a chilling picture of a man meticulously constructing his own isolated world within those walls. The house itself, a grim time capsule of clutter and shadow.
The search was exhaustive. Investigators tore up the deck, methodically scanned the entire backyard. Boxes and boxes of potential evidence were carefully removed.
They were searching for echoes of the victims, trophies they called them, perhaps personal jewelry, identification cards, anything that could link the missing directly back to this unsettling place.
Women who had vanished decades ago, their fates unknown until now.
And of course, the ever-present hope for biological evidence, a trace that could speak volumes even after so much time had passed.